introduce our three final panelists today. This turned out to be timed really well because I don't know, for you all that were here all day, nutrition has come up on several occasions. And so we'll have several things to get, issues to get your response to. But here with me today, to my left, is Ellen Vollinger, who is the SNAP Director for the Food Research and Action Center and has been covering SNAP for longer than I've been doing farm bills, I know that. Rob Larew, a veteran of Capitol Hill, who's now the president of the National Farmers Union. And on the end, Roger Szemraj, principal at OFW Law, and also a veteran of Capitol Hill and appropriations issues in particular. So, Ellen, I wanted to start with you and just go right to the question we raised with the title of this. We often think of nutrition programs, and of course, obviously, the largest one by far in terms of the farm that's authorized by the Farm Bill is SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We think of it often, or talk of it, let's put it, we talk of it often as an urban issue. Talk a little bit about its importance as to rural communities.
Yeah, no, Philip, thank you. Thank you for having this panel. Thank you for having us. And it's an honor to be with my colleagues from Farmers Union and from Olson Frank. I think sometimes it's misunderstood that SNAP is serving 41 million people. That's each and every month. It's responded very strongly during the pandemic. We heard some remarks this morning. Dan Christensen talked about that. We, of course, have been taken to school by the people who chaired the Farm Bill process and so appreciate what they talk about in terms of including all of the stakeholders in the process and getting that urban-rural coalition together to be able to get a Farm Bill enacted. But SNAP, in addition to serving a lot of people, is serving a lot of people in rural areas. Mm-hmm. The dollars that are going through the program are benefiting all parts of the food chain, from the farmers, the ranchers, all kinds of producers, food manufacturers, through to the truckers, the people who are putting the food into the stores, the store clerks. I think sometimes it's little understood that it's benefiting the local economy. For every dollar of SNAP, there's about $1.50 to $1.80 that's going back into the economy, and that's helping make sure that some businesses that might not be able to stay in business as a grocery store, they're able to be there for everybody in the community, not just the SNAP customer. So that is an important piece of it. National Grocers Association has also done a study on how many jobs are associated with SNAP spending, but also how many tax dollars get generated, because when people have SNAP benefits on their cards at the grocery store, they're able to use that for food, and then some of their other resources can go to things that are subject to sales tax. So there's a lot of benefits, and we appreciate the fact that there has been such strong support out of the ag community over the years, understanding that connection between rural America and SNAP. Mm-hmm.
Rob, I want to get to the politics in a second, but I'd first just I'd like to get Roger to talk to us about how the coalition that we talk about, the urban-rural, the ag nutrition coalition came about, and then Roger will move to you for
well, Phil, I think the reality is that the coalition understood that they both benefit from the programs and that they need to work together. Think a little bit about the history of some of the food assistance programs. You go back to 1939 with the first Food Stamp Act. Part of the stamps were used to purchase surplus commodities. I know it's not part of the Farm Bill. If you look at child nutrition, the Russell Act, the National School Lunch Act, looked at both providing a healthier America while supporting domestic agriculture. You go back into the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which many people don't realize was the precursor to the WIC program, that was purchasing USDA foods. The same thing was true with TFAP. The only program I know where the acronym remained the same, from Temporary Emergency Food Assistance Program to the Emergency Food Assistance Program. Again, it was a matter of purchasing commodities to assist farmer sales, but also to provide food assistance to people. And in fact, when TFAP was created, it was to make up for some of the shortfall in the SNAP program. Think in terms of the international food assistance programs. PL 480 was a market development tool while it was also an international food assistance program. And then you think in terms of what's been going on even more recently. We've had trade adjustment assistance that has supported farmers, which was used to provide food assistance to needy food individuals. We've also had the Farmers to Families food box, which is basically the same thing, and we're looking at some reiterations of doing that. For years, we've had bonus commodity programs, which have been used at food banks and other places, including schools, where again, it was a matter of helping producers while at the same time providing food assistance. So I think there's a clear and long history of the two groups mutually benefiting from these programs.
Okay. By the way, get your questions in on Slido, and we will get to those as many as we can, as soon as we can. Rob, you were at Colin Peterson's side through, I don't know how many farm bills now? A few. You know, we saw a couple of runs in 2014 and 2018 at cutting the nutrition title with various tightening work requirements and so forth. They created problems in getting, as our former chairman noted, they caused some problems in getting the bill through, but they ultimately didn't result in much. The proponents of those cuts didn't come away with a whole lot in the end. Do you see that happening again? How's the politics changed at all, or has it changed in Congress over the last couple of farm bills and going into this next one?
Sure, that's a huge question. I guess I would just start by saying, as we've already been hearing from before, farm bills are freaking hard. They are really hard to pull together. And that starts from, kind of the first budget instructions as you start looking within the committee and you have regional differences, even within one commodity. Hello, dairy. There are a lot of, so farm bills are always going to be hard, and there's always that combination that you have to try to bring together. But I think what we've seen over the course of several farm bills now is that if you don't have a strong nutrition title, if you don't have that taken care of and as part of the package, it is next to impossible to get a farm bill through. So yes, there's been some hoops that have had to be jumped through. In terms of kind of guessing what the next farm bill battles might look like, I'm not going to venture too much of a guess except to say that I think ultimately at the end there will be a combination, including a coalition comprised of a lot of folks in here that want to see a farm bill, that want to make sure that there is a strong nutrition title to address hunger in this country, and that ultimately there will be one that comes through. What it will look like, through the course of that, we can certainly speculate, but we won't get that if we don't. Look, we've got a little bit of a soapbox for me. Randy Russell, God bless him, brought up the pie charts, and that's exactly what I wanted to do here. Hang on, because you guys have seen this, folks know it, but regardless of what the specific numbers are, we know that nutrition is a huge component of this, right? Close to 75% maybe, and that goes up and down. Too often, I'm sure it's nobody in this room, but too often, this is mischaracterized. And somehow, this pie chart is seen as one pie that doesn't change size. And that the programs in here, if one particular component gets bigger than the others, then it's not working somehow, and that somebody else is doing without. And while that might be true that we have a finite amount of resources with which to put a farm bill together, these pie charts can be really misleading if folks aren't looking at them correctly. The fact is, the SNAP portion of that, nutrition part of that, goes up and down because the economy goes up and down, right? The needs go up and down. It's working. We have the other components in there with the farm safety net that goes up and down depending on how the program was set up. And so as we look ahead, I hope that the conversations and the dialogues and the political kind of positions that folks are taking is at least based upon facts and a good understanding of how these programs operate and how they're intended to operate, and ultimately we can come through with a strong safety net for both farmers and for consumers.
Rob, I'm glad you brought up the numbers and the pie chart, because the numbers are going to matter. And there are going to be questions about them. I think you heard the ranking member on House Agriculture Committee talk about SNAP and some of the increased costs there. Ellen, would you talk a minute, in this latest omnibus, just enacted, I believe, signed into law last week, estimated that SNAP is going to cost about $140 billion for this fiscal year. Before the pandemic, CBO was estimating SNAP was going to cost about 60-something billion dollars. So it's more than doubled in cost. Some of that, a lot of that is the pandemic. Some of that is some increases in benefits that we also want to talk about with the Thrifty Food Plan. Ellen, talk about why this program has grown and how much of that is, not all of that's permanent in terms of that growth.
Yeah, so I would say, Philip, one of the things we haven't heard mentioned here very much is hunger and the fact that there's an imminent hunger cliff that's looming, because a lot of the SNAP spending that's going on and the funding that's been going on was Congress's and the Trump administration's response to COVID very early on in March of 2020, and thank goodness we're very appreciative, and that country should be appreciative of the action taken, because they were providing temporary boost to SNAP benefits. And that is one of the biggest factors in the amount of spending that CBO is reporting. Unfortunately, I mean, it's not unfortunate, COVID declaration will end at some point and the crisis will go away. But when it does, it's going to be a very abrupt cut to SNAP households benefits. And on average, in most states, most recipients are going to lose an average of $82 a person a month in SNAP benefits. That is going to be a big shock all through the supply of the food chain in terms of what people are getting back economically. But for those households who were struggling with hunger to begin with, it's going to be very tough. Now, a piece of the SNAP spending that was an increase did have to do with greater numbers of people participating because of the crisis with the pandemic, but also since last October, an adjustment that was directed by the last Farm Bill for USDA to undertake to evaluate the basis on which SNAP benefits are calculated. And that market basket, the Thrifty Food Plan, was adjusted, updated, if you will, and that is a permanent change. Before the Thrifty Food Plan was adjusted, before the extra boosts that are temporary, the SNAP benefit per person per day was about $4.20. Without the temporary boosts, and after this adjustment that was made in October, the average per person per day is about $5.50. I think the reason the pie charts, I think, are confusing for the American public is percentages, billions of dollars. I think those are just not very concrete. To me, they're very concrete either. But I think people can understand $4.20 a day, $5.50 a day. Even with these temporary boosts, people are getting about $8 a person a day. These are not very large figures to be dealing with. And so we're going to try to get people to understand a little bit of what it means from an ordinary person's point of view if you're on SNAP.
So just to recap, the benefits got up about $550. How much from before 20, you said? So how much do they drop off when these public health authorizations go away.
It'll go from a little less than $8 a person a day back down to the $5.50. And for some households, it's going to be much worse cut than the average cut. For many seniors who only qualify for $20 a month normally, they will be going from $250 a month to $20 a month. That's going to be just really tough on them.
Roger, what do you make of the ranking member Thompson saying that, talking about the Thrifty Food Plan, as Ellen just noted, that was actually required by USDA was required to do that by the 2018 Farm Bill. It's not something that they did on their own, or initiated on their own, I should say. What do you make of the ranking member questioning, saying that USDA hasn't come and explained this, and seeming to question the basis of it? Do you see any attempt to roll that back?
Well, honestly, and again, I want to be appropriate here since I didn't hear the Congressman's full comments, but the point is, to the extent that USDA did what was required by the prior Farm Bill, should be a sufficient reason as to why it was done. If he has questions as to how the benefit level was calculated, you know, certainly there can be further discussion about that and review about that. Anytime an administrative decision is made, it's subject to some type of review, and I think the department would welcome that. But again, at the same time, you know, thinking in terms of just what Ellen said now, to the extent we didn't have a benefit increase or adjustment of the Thrifty Food Plan in 45 years, it was time to do something. To the extent that we now have a situation in which benefits are likely to be cut back substantially because there will no longer be the supplemental benefit, again, we have to take a look at the realistic impact, not just on the individuals, but think about it. This money is spent in stores. So to the extent the money is not spent, you're going to have some retailers that are going to be facing some losses as well. So to the extent that there's always been a belief that there is a multiplier effect associated with SNAP purchases, well, if there's a reduction, there's a multiplier in that direction as well. So that is something else that needs to be thought about. And again, one other thing we haven't raised here, but you know, again, this was the column Marshall and I did this week for Agri-Pulse about what's going on with the upcoming White House Conference on Nutrition. Taking a look at the context of these programs, the way in which they operate, what the benefit level should be, is something that needs to be done. The 1969 conference led to a number of feeding program changes in the mid-1970s. We may see some other changes coming out of the White House Conference, but it's time we had a full and open discussion of what all these programs are and what benefits are realistic and what people really need.
I'm glad you brought up that conference, White House Conference. Congressman Jim McGovern, chairman of the House Rules Committee, active member, vocal member of the House Agriculture Committee. I might add, there's $2.5 million actually, I believe that's the amount, in the omnibus to fund this conference. So it sounds like it might happen. Rob, do you have any sense of how this, what we should watch for out of this conference? Could it potentially have some impact on the Farm Bill and discussion around the Farm Bill?
Well, I think, you know, much to Roger's comment there, that, you know, having active, open conversation about what the needs are out there, what's working, what's not working, is useful in any kind of respect around public policy. We hear a lot of buzzwords thrown around sometimes when we look at some of the proposals in the past about you know, changes to the programs. If we're talking about SNAP, for example, you know, innovative ways, you know, innovation and so forth. I think the more that we can talk about what should be happening out there, what could be happening out there, but making sure ultimately that it's, you know, access to the programs and that we're truly addressing hunger. So the conference, look, first of all, you know, huge kudos to the tenacity of Congressman McGovern, who's been pushing for this for I don't know how many years, that it's actually coming to fruition, and that the resources are there. It'll be useful to add to the debate.
Roger, I want to turn to a subject. We've focused on SNAP, but I believe you mentioned TFAP, or a couple of you mentioned the Emergency Food Assistance Program that supplies food to the food banks. Has there been any impact, do you think, politically? Do you think that's going to be part of the Farm Bill debate? Is there any changes in terms of the nutrition program, especially coming out of COVID? The lines we saw, the popularity of the food box program, and so forth. Are there any changes that might be in play in that program? And I guess two questions. Any changes could be in play in terms of those programs, assistance to food banks, and has this affected the politics at all around nutrition programs?
Well, again, TFAP I really do believe will continue as part of the next Farm Bill. The question that's going to come up is going to be, what is the funding level associated with the commodities that are purchased in that program? Keep in mind, if I recall correctly, there is about $380 million that comes out of the SNAP account to pay for the foods purchased in TFAP. That's supplemented by what's going on with bonus commodities. It's been supplemented with some of the other items that we've had because of COVID relief. So there's going to be a question of what's going to be the supply of food that will continue to be provided to food banks. So I think that's something else that will be a policy issue that can be reviewed. There's also been some discussion of what foods are offered in the program. There's been increased efforts to provide fresh fruits and vegetables as part of that program. It's a great idea, but it takes different infrastructure to do that. You have to have different storage capability, you have to have different distribution capability, you have to have a different time frame in order for getting that done. So again, I think those are all part of the legitimate things that could be considered when looking at that program.
Rob, do you think, is there any long-lasting effect of what happened during COVID? People saw lines of cars, realized how easily we could have people in dire need so quickly.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope in some ways that we don't run the risk like we do sometimes in Title I, and that is we draw up farm programs in times of potentially high prices, or milk prices are high. And so we craft a Farm Bill policy for the future, based upon what's happening today. I hope that as we look at whether it's strengthening TFAP, SNAP, et cetera, that the lessons learned from the pandemic are certainly there when we write the next bill.
Ellen, we have a question asking about the impact on rural grocery stores and the cost of business doing the increases in cost of doing business. I'd like you to address that, and also the issue of food prices, the increase in food prices generally. I mean, they've gone up 8.6% in the past year, supermarket prices. You don't have an automatic monthly increase in SNAP benefits because of the price of food. When will SNAP beneficiaries get an increase in benefits? What's the impact of these increases in cost generally and in food cost?
So Philip, in terms of benefit adequacy, the Thrifty Food Plan market basket is priced every month, but it's the month of June that sets how SNAP benefits will be based going forward, but that adjustment doesn't happen until the following October. So in June of 2022, that market basket will be priced, and that'll be the basis for calculating the maximum benefits in SNAP for October. And then that will be the same amount for 12 months, and there won't be a new adjustment until October of 2023. That's a long lag time in terms of being sensitive to what's actually happening in terms of the marketplace. The bigger problem and the bigger challenge, frankly, we believe at FRAC, in terms of households having enough purchasing power, is that the Thrifty Food Plan itself is the wrong market basket. It's the cheapest, the most meager of the 4 government food programs. And if we were to go just a step up to the low-cost food plan, that would provide people with a more meaningful benefit, and we think that's actually what's needed. There is a bill in Congress to do that, and I think that would help a lot.
Give us an example of how those two different, because most folks aren't familiar with what's under the Thrifty Food Plan and what the difference is. Can you give an example or two?
Well, the market basket, they take into account some different items and price them. And the reason that the low cost would be more appropriate, we think, is it's probably about a 10% or so increase above the Thrifty Food Plan. Again, we're talking, when you get down to the actual dollars, it doesn't sound like tremendous dollars, but they might be the margin for a household to be able to get that healthier food or the more desirable product that they want, whether that's lean meat or chicken or whatever it is. The researchers at MIT have a living wage calculator, and they've looked at what they think the basic standard of living is in different American cities. And you can look up, whatever city you're interested in, and they will give you an idea of what kind of a wage you would need to earn to have a basic standard of living. Those researchers have chosen for the food cost portion of that calculation to base it on the low-cost food plan. So we don't think we're alone in making that assessment, that really Thrifty is too bare bones a market basket to really be able to do it for the consumer.
We have a question here, and I'll start with you, Roger. How do we advance better nutrition when addressing food security? Let's put it, how do we advance, how are we doing, and how can we advance improve nutrition through the nutrition title of the Farm Bill?
Well, we're always looking at nutrition education programs. What can work to help people understand what is a better meal, what they should be eating. Again, that goes back to recommendations from the dietary guidelines. This goes back to taking a look at what people might be getting recommended for their diet plan from their physicians. Again, I think there's been a lot of discussion of the fact that doctors don't wind up having enough courses in nutrition to basically teach people more when they go in for what's going on. To what extent can we use school meal programs as a way to demonstrate what is good nutrition so that kids become adjusted to the type of foods that are coming out there? But ultimately, in the end, and this goes back to what Ellen was just talking about, it's one thing to say what people should eat. It's another thing to make sure that they have the resources available to do it. And if somebody is living on a limited diet or on a limited income with limited SNAP benefit, they're going to be very price conscious of what they're purchasing. So they're going to be looking more at the price point of what's going on rather than the nutritional content of what's going on. So that's why having a realistic association between what we believe people should be eating and what resources are needed in order to do that is something we should think about.
Okay. Rob, it's a good question for you. How can we get more farmers and anti-hunger advocates to have more Farm Bill discussions about mutual benefits?
That's a great question. First of all, I'll become a Farmers Union member. I would also encourage groups to become part of the conversation very directly in things like Alliance to End Hunger and many others, because this is where a lot of those conversations are taking place, and recognizing that there's an inherent desire, even if you have differences about the different programs and so forth, there's an inherent desire by farmers, as we are the ones producing the food, to make sure that it's going to alleviate hunger. It's the reason why a lot of farm groups are very active contributors to food donation programs. I think that a number of the existing alliances out there are important parts of this, and having conversations like this right here, recognizing that the coalition, very broad, diverse coalition of interest on farm bills passed, prove the importance of it for this next farm bill itself.
Rob, I want to also ask you, how did we get, if you could take us inside what happened with the 2018 Farm Bill. We started, I remember a markup, very contentious markup in spring, I believe it was 2018, and it was a partisan bill. I don't believe any Democrats voted for it because of the changes to the SNAP title. How did we get from there to a bill that mandated the reevaluation of the Thrifty Food Plan, did away with the changes in work requirements and so forth? What were the key moments there?
Well, there are other people in this room that can tell you what happened actually behind the scenes. But, you know, certainly, as I understand it, that particular provision, you know, was a bipartisan effort to make sure that that was updated. And although not directly related to that, I mean, the fact is that we have all of these competing and sometimes partisan differences on this bill, but we have a couple of other kind of backstops to this, and that is the fact that not only do you have to get it through each chamber, but we all ultimately want a bill that is going to be signed into law. And you know, I think in this case you had, you know, a situation where you had the Senate taking a different approach. Because of the challenges that the House was having, you kind of had that, I don't want to use the term mitigating, but I guess I'll use it since I can't come up with a different one, effect there. But I think in terms of this particular provision, it certainly was a bipartisan agreement there in the House to include it. So this request for a review, I agree with Roger that it's always good to make sure that any kind of executive, or rather department's effort here in updating that it's now, you know, going to be thoroughly reviewed, but it was bipartisan to include it.
Mm-hmm. Ellen, do you see any risk? What are you most worried about going into the next Farm Bill with regard to the nutrition title? And I'll give you the last word here.
Well, it's always good to have the last word, Philip. So I would just say that top of mind for us is whether or not the Farm Bill discussion will be person-centered, brought down to that community level of how are things working, what's the evidence for this or that. We know that one of the lessons from the pandemic is a new awareness, and it might be short-lived, I hope not, that anybody could need help at any time, and that it's important to have a safety net that will respond. It does go up and down, but one of the glaring deficiencies, which we hope will be addressed in the next Farm Bill, is not only on adequacy of benefits, but access, because there were inequities in the program before the pandemic. Some of those were very glaring during the pandemic, and we may see some new look outside of SNAP to programs like the program that supports food on Indian reservations, because tribal communities are forced to choose between SNAP and FDPIR. That's an inequity. There's a block-granted program in Puerto Rico that doesn't respond as well as regular SNAP. We believe that's an inequity. But there are other access issues with respect to particular populations not having the same ability to be served by SNAP. And so it's, I guess one of our fears is whether or not we will be able to get people to take a real look at what's working, what's not working, where are the gaps, and what could they do about them.
And well, I've got a follow-up one. Can these things be done with no cost? Is there any way, assuming there's no additional funding for the nutrition title, although our poll shows that certainly support in this room for that, is there any way to move money around? Is there any additional funding or shifts in funding that could be made?
Well, we don't know where money comes from. That's never something the advocates feel is within our ken. We think we know what is needed, and we try to show the evidence for what's needed. We do know that generally policymakers, when there's a will, often will find a way to find the money. And I don't know if we will see as a country that we'd be as fortunate as we were in 2008 when the House Ways and Means Committee found money off of the regular farm bill. But it is, it's a country that ought to prioritize things in our view. And so we don't know where the money will come from. We'll just make the asks.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Join me in thanking Ellen, Rob, and Roger for sharing their expertise on nutrition programs. Thank you very much. And now, after a short video from our gold sponsor, Curious Plot, we'll have a discussion with and hear from the ranking Republican on the Senate Agriculture Committee, John Bozeman.
Looking closer, seeing further. That's how we do it. At Curious Plot, we're driven to find what's next for agriculture, animal care, and food. We stay curious because that's what it takes to grow understanding. That's how we plot strategies and tell stories that get results time after time. Marketing, communications, and consulting that look closer and see further. Curious Plot. We can't wait to help you tell your story.